Welcome to Still City Growth. I'm your host, Bill Ildenfritz. Each week, we'll explore the passions, expertise, and experiences of business owners and founders in the greater Pittsburgh area. Still City Growth is proudly sponsored by Murphy Business of Pittsburgh, committed to providing exceptional services to meet all your business needs. Let's dive in. I'm really excited to talk to my next guest. Get ready, because he will drop serious wisdom that you won't want to miss. He's a member of the Private Directors Association, helping to improve private companies' growth and sustainability through governance that adds value. He's the author of The Succession Solution, the strategic guide to business transition. And he's the founder of The Succession Solution. Brad Franc, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for the invitation.
I look forward to this. So, Brad, we start off the show always with the same question. You ready for it?
I'm going to try to be.
All right. What is the number one most important strategy for growing your business?
I think the number one most important strategy for growing your business is to try to figure out what the customer needs and solve it.
So how do you do that? What would your process be like?
Yeah. And so I think many years ago, I took a course called the Sandler Selling System, and it really turned things on my head. It's all about asking questions. You know, as much as you'd like to talk about yourself and how wonderful you are, people really aren't interested. What they want is, can you solve my problem? And by asking the appropriate questions, you can do two things. One, by asking the appropriate questions, they can understand that you actually know their business by asking good questions. And two, you learn their pain points. So you've got to solve their problems first. And so I think that's the number one way I have grown my business, is trying to solve customer problems.
I do agree. I actually was trained in that system too, and it has helped me as a broker as well, especially the pain points. So tell me more about it. Like, what are some of the questions you would ask your clients to kind of gain insight on their pain points?
Yeah. And so, you start out by saying, I should say start out by saying, but, if we're sitting here a year from today, Bill, or 6 months from today, or 3 months from today, whatever it may be, what is it that has to happen for you to feel good about your progress or the situation, whatever you might be selling? And then it's okay, if that's what you'd like to see have happen, what are the obstacles? What's preventing you from getting there? And then, why is it preventing you from getting there? So those are the types of questions. It's all about, finding the challenges, the obstacle. It's a great book called The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. And I really believe that when you help a client overcome those obstacles, because there's always obstacles. If there were no obstacles, the client would be there already. And then you partner with them and help them solve that problem.
Yes, I really like that. I really like that for sure. So you deal with businesses all the time in confidential information. So your first comment was, asking questions to understand their business. But at the same time, they're trying to keep things confidential. You're keeping things confidential. So how do you help them? How do you help them tell you enough, but obviously try to keep that confidentiality as well?
Bill, that really is an excellent question, because if the client can't trust you, then you can't help them. So some way, somehow, you have to develop that rapport to let them know that you're a trusted advisor. And so, as an attorney, for 37 years, I had an ethical responsibility to keep client confidences. But now that have a consulting practice, it's different. But I in all my agreements, I talk about confidentiality. But I think it's like anything else. You start out slow and you ask some questions. And if they don't want to share something, that's fine. But then you can't help them. And it's not like we're asking them, very, very deep personal questions. But I think you do need to develop that trust. And it doesn't happen overnight. It's a process.
I agree. How do you, because you and I both look at, for financial records, tax returns for, say, for evaluations, how do you help the client understand, you are there to help them, and that information stays with you. But it's very important for you to see it as well to help you drive some of your comments and advice you give them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the way I try to explain it is, look, I'm a resource. And if you want to use me as a resource, I'm here. If you don't, that's okay. And we can move on. But, I've reviewed thousands of financial statements and all sorts of legal documents. And it's not that your financials aren't important. They are important, but they really aren't that important to me that I'm going to share it with the rest of the world. But I'm here to help. And so to the extent that you can let them know that you're there to help, and you can be a valuable resource, I think then oftentimes, at least in my experience, then they feel more confident.
I do agree. I do agree. Let's change the subject a little bit to succession planning, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Tell me, in your own simple terms, what is succession planning?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think many people define it all sorts of different ways. And if I can respond in a reverse order, exit planning isn't selling your business. Uh, Although that is a very good strategy, exit planning isn't putting a will, isn't creating a trust. Although those are components of a succession plan, I believe succession planning, when you boil it down in the business, it's the transfer of three things. It's the transfer of knowledge, it's the transfer of management, and the transfer of ownership. And I would argue you can't transfer management and ownership unless you first have transferred knowledge. That is, you transfer the knowledge of the business to that next generation. And then, eventually, Ben Franklin once said the only two things certain in life are death and taxes. I would argue it's death, taxes, and succession. Eventually, you're leaving, whether you like it or not, whether you got feet first or you walk out, right? So you got to deal with management. It's a critical success factor. And then, of course, ownership. Eventually, you can transfer management and not ownership, but it's a transfer of ownership. So depending on what a business owner is dealing with, I think those are the three types of succession.
Talk to me a little bit about, because I know some of my clients get a little confused about this. You just made a comment about management and ownership. What are the differences? And talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, especially in a closely held business, oftentimes the founder will be the owner and the manager. And when he or she is ready to bring in that next generation CEO, COO, president, general manager, whatever the case may be, they don't have to necessarily give up ownership, right? As a matter of fact, technically, they don't give up ultimate management. Or alternatively, if I have a child that's going to take over the business from running it, I don't have to transfer the ownership to them. I can transfer management to them. I can name them as the president or the chief operating officer or the general manager. And at some point in time, I want to transfer ownership, but the two are distinct. And, many times succession only deals with the succession of management. If you look at these, Fortune 500 CEOs, it's all about the succession of management and not ownership.
Let me ask you this. Why do you feel, because we both agree succession planning, exit planning, whatever you want to call it in some senses, is extremely important. Why do you feel business owners wait for so long to actually develop a succession plan?
Yeah, that's another terrific question. But I think there's a number of reasons why people wait. And sometimes they're emotional, sometimes they're financial. So one is they don't know how to they know how to run their business really well, but they don't know how succession planning works. And they don't know where to turn. Just like if I, need some plumbing work. If I have a plumber, great. If I don't, I'm sort of, where do I go? So one is that they don't know. Another is, as one of my clients once told me, Brad, my fear is I'm going to go from he's the guy to who's he. I mean, there's just this loss of identity. Sometimes there's a fear of if it's a family, the family rivalry. You got to pick somebody, and if there's more than one person, that can create problems. Alternatively, Bill, if this company is my retirement, I can't afford to get this wrong. I got to get it right. And so you sort of wait until all of the lights turn green, and they never all turn green. So there's a variety of reasons. And by the way, I think That's a key question a business owner needs to ask themselves. Why haven't they? Because that is probably one of the big obstacles.
I agree. How about emotion? How do you, I mean, emotion gets involved. You just made a couple of comments, family dynamics and everything like that. And maybe people are afraid to deal with that emotion. How do you help them through that process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what I have seen over my 30 years of succession planning, as a lawyer, former CPA, I think I'm the greatest guy in the world when it comes to taxes and legal issues, but seldom is that the issue. More often than not, it's the emotional aspect of it. And so once again, you go back to kind of basics. And when I start, I talk to people about succession, I say, what's your ultimate vision, right? So where are we going with this thing? Do you need to sell it for retirement? And that's perfectly fine. It's their answer, not my answer. Or it's for my family. Or I had a great friend of mine. He had no family, but his employees were his family. And his vision was, I want to make sure my employees are taken care of. So when it becomes emotional, when things get difficult, and they always get difficult, you go back to say, okay, I know you're upset. Um, what's the prime objective? What's our vision here? And let's keep around the vision and sort of calm it down. But, it's hard to deal with. And I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I think that if you go back to, your basic goals and what your core principles are, I think you can overcome a lot of the emotional aspects or at least deal with them.
I agree. I know as a business broker, part of what I deal with is that emotion because we all think we have the prettiest baby and it's perfect and it's wonderful. And sometimes you have to manage that emotion of that business owner to understand the true picture of their whole company.
Yeah, and you probably see it even more than I do because when a buyer comes along, they're trying to negotiate. They say, "Well, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong," and it can offend a seller. It's like, "Well, don't tell me what's wrong. No, don't buy." Right? And it's difficult. It's a difficult process because really, a startup company, someone that started their own business, it's like another child of the family.
Yes. Yes. No, I totally agree. I did mention kind of succession planning slash exit planning, whatever you call it. And I remember one of our earlier conversations we talked. It's the same, but there's definitely some differences. So maybe people are a little confused about that. What's the difference between succession planning versus exit planning?
Yeah, and I don't want to get into a long discussion and argue with folks about their definition of exit plan, but my experience has been, and what I've seen is when we're talking about exit planning, we're talking about selling the business. Now, you don't. I understand that maybe that some people don't agree with that, but that's how I view exit planning, which is perfectly fine because many people need or want to sell their business. Bill, I've had 3 businesses myself. I sold every one of them. I had no interest in keeping them for the next generation. But I view that as uh, exit planning. Succession planning, I believe, is different. It's planning and executing on the succession of, as I mentioned before, ownership, management, and knowledge in the reverse order, of course. And I would argue that if you have a really good succession plan, when you go to exit with your exit plan, your company will be more valuable. And there's a lot of research on that as well.
Agree. Um, I'm assuming one of the roadblocks maybe you face sometimes is why we're not doing a succession plan is cost. But correct me if I'm wrong, not doing a succession plan may be even a bigger cost by not doing one. Is that correct?
Well said. I mentioned about research. There was a research done a number of years ago. They had talked to, I'm trying to think, it was Boston Consulting Group, interviewed a number of investment bankers in your world, and found that companies that have a defined succession plan are worth a turn to 2 turns in value. So if the company sells for 5 times EBITDA or net income, it'll sell for 6 or 7. So the ROI on that investment is 10 to 20 fold. But yeah, when you ask somebody to spend thousands of dollars on a succession plan, just like spending money on your estate plan, it's an investment that I believe every business should have.
I agree. How about time? Same thing. I'm sure they say, "Hey, I'm just too busy. I'm too busy." What's your thoughts on that?
That's right. So the line I give people is the longer you wait, the fewer the options you'll have, right? If you want to wait until they take out feed first, you're absolutely right. But the more time you give yourself, the more planning you can do. Whether it's converting from a C corporation to an S corporation, not getting into the weeds too much on taxes. There's lots of tax planning, or whether to take out a partner before the sale occurs, or whatever it may be, getting the proper salespeople in line, the agreements in place. The more time you have, the more planning you can do. But, once again, lots of people wait until the last minute. I recommend that people start succession planning 5 to 10 years ahead of time. And I'll go one step further. Um, I said this to a young CEO in his 40s when he was named CEO. Your job now is to become teacher, to bring up the next CEO, start training that person.
Why so important to start 5, 10 years out?
Well, a couple reasons. Number one, it takes time for people to figure things out. I don't know about you, but when I entered the professional world, I was clueless.
Mhm.
As a CPA, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, I went to school, I got good grades, but I really didn't know. It takes time, especially to be the CEO or president of the company. That's number one. Number two, I tell business owners, what if you get it wrong, right? You wait until the last minute, you pick the wrong CEO or president or next gen leader, and they're wrong. Wouldn't you rather find out sooner as opposed to later, right? And there's nothing wrong with starting early. You can test that person, you can train that person. So I believe 5 to 10 years, you should have identified that next leader. They're not going to step in your shoes. Identify that next leader and start training them and see how he or she is doing.
How about any other roadblocks that really you get a lot of from the owner saying, "Hey, I don't have time," or I can't do the succession plan because of X."
Yeah, I think that I can't do succession planning because everybody relies on me, and there's nobody that can do what I can do, right? And it's that Superman mentality. And we talk about risks. I try to have business owners think about the risks, and oftentimes the business owner, while it's the company's greatest asset, it's also the greatest liability. And so they think that nobody can do it themselves. So that's oftentimes a roadblock. Another roadblock is, my customer will leave me. They like me and they won't like anybody. Well, again, then all of a sudden, how valuable is your company, right? Or you have a bank obligation, right? And this is what I see more often than not. So I'm personally liable to a bank, and I can't get out from underneath the personal guarantee. And so I can't do succession planning. Well, you're going to have to figure out something because eventually it will come due. I had a client recently, as a couple of weeks ago, called me up. He sold his business 2 years ago, and he said, "I'm still liable, a guarantor on this company's loan. Am I responsible if it goes, the loan isn't paid?" I said, "Yes, it's paid." So, those are some of the reasons.
Yeah. I think you and I were chatting recently about, even vendors. Like there was a vendor in the paper that lost as a pretty big like anchor, say, company that lost a couple of their vendors. They kind of just got up and closed all of a sudden. And now this anchor has to find somebody quickly because they had no idea that this company's is up and closing. And now they're in a pinch. So succession even planning, even for like these anchors and stuff, there needs to be a
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, when you rely on one person, one company, you put your company at risk. And also, once again, if you decide to exit, a buyer comes along and says, I can't rely just on this one sole vendor. Or alternatively, where I see another issue, Bill, is a lot with manufacturers reps, right? And so the manufacturer rep has one manufacturer, and I have a great relationship with my manufacturer. I sell a lot of their products, and I go and want to sell it to you. And manufacturer's like, "Well, we like you, Brad, but we don't like Bill. And so we're not approving it. I'm stuck," right? And so that's another concern that you, again, all of these can be overcome, Bill, but you got to put them on the table. We got to sort of deal with them, right?
Yes. Yes. Let's get a drink here. So I have a little bit of a difficult question. So, what happens when we'll say that CEO is your child that you just put in place and he's not doing well? So, how does these owners, maybe have to fire your own child? How do you deal with that as an advisor? And how does the owners kind of deal with that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have personally witnessed where that tragedy occurs. That is, the tragedy is the owner cannot fire his or her child or in-law, right? And the company suffered irreparable harm, and they actually had to sell it at a fire sale. I mean, it happens a lot. It may not be a practical answer for everybody, but what I have found, and I think best practices, is that you develop a board of advisors or a board of directors, a couple independent people that can take the heat for you, right? And so, if my son Johnny is a knucklehead and he's not doing a good job, and you're on the board, and I say, hey, Johnny, I'm going to rely on Bill. He's the head of the compensation committee. He's going to evaluate you, and whatever he says, I'm going to go with ultimately. And yeah, again, easier said than done, but that's one way to approach it. Another way to approach it is in advance, right? And what you say is, okay, Johnny, these are the responsibilities. These are the core values that we live by, and this is what you're going to be evaluated on. Do you agree with this evaluation process? And do you agree with this process of values? Yes, 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 yes. Okay, well, if that's the case, then we're going to look at it a year or 18 months, in fact, see if you violated them. Now, again, if they did, it's still not going to be easy, but I tell people that they should develop a fair process and not try to have fairness used as a weapon against them. Use it as a tool and not as a weapon. So what do I mean? Hey, Bill, you're doing a lousy job. I have to let you go. I'm firing. Well, that's not fair, Dad. It's not fair. Okay, so that's used as a weapon. Whereas a fair process would be, hey, Bill, let's use this evaluation process. Let's have this independent evaluate you, and let's go through this leadership development program, have it evaluate. Is that a fair process before we begin? Yes, Dad, it's a fair process. And then you give yourself a little bit of cover in that regard.
I love that quote actually. I love that quote. How about this? I mean, business owners don't realize, but they could be hit by a bus tomorrow. What happens to your business? Have you dealt with maybe, health? If someone really gets sick, gets cancer, unfortunately, and now you have this business, like you said, maybe going through a fire sale, and it's a mess.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very early in my professional career, Bill. I represented a gentleman that had a sign business, and he was everything. He was a corporation, but he owned everything. He had no will, he had no power of attorney, he had no healthcare power of attorney. He fell off the cherry picker, right, putting a sign up, and was in a coma. His wife couldn't sign anything. They literally lost the business, right? About 45 to 60 days later, he came out of the coma, again, lost the business, started again, and he's doing fine. But there's a situation where if he just had signed a power of attorney that would allow his wife to act on his behalf, or his one of the colleagues at work, he would have been fine. But these things happen. We don't want them to happen. I will also go to say that a number of the succession planning that I work, bonding companies or insurance companies, they'll say to their client, we need a succession plan. We're not going to insure you. We're not going to bond you unless we see a succession plan, because they know they are at risk, right? When that happens.
It's interesting. You made a comment way in the beginning here about asking the right questions for pain points, but I mean, it seems like a lot of these questions if you have a succession plan and your advisor was good and asked the right questions, some of these problems that we talked about would never possibly have happened or happened differently.
Yeah, I mean, you look, you're never going to be able to reduce 100% of the risk. But are you more comfortable if you're eliminating 80% of the risk than none of the risk? So when and if it does occur, and life comes at you fast at times, um, you're much further ahead. And the other thing is, again, you become a stronger company because not only do you cover those unforeseen situations, but you bring in other people. Now your company is not just about Brad or Bill. It becomes more valuable.
Let me ask you this, from your experience over all these years, do you think it is harder for business owners to let go of control versus actually the hard work it takes to start that business?
Oh, a number of years ago, I was working with the CPA, and the business owner was transferring voting control. And I said to him, I said, "How many times have you seen this happen?" He said, "Counting this one, just once." And of course he was joking, but yeah, it's really, really hard to give up control. But you don't have to, right? So number one, you can transfer management. Number two, a technique that not that difficult, which I deployed many, many, many times with a company, whether it's an LLC or whether it's a corporation, you create voting and non-voting stock, right? Or voting and non-voting membership interest. So I literally, Bill, can transfer 99% of the ownership of this company to my son or to my daughter or whomever, all non-voting. I have one share of the voting, and I'm in control. I can hire and fire. I can pay myself whatever I want to pay myself. And so this is a way that we can take those first steps. So first we transfer knowledge and we transfer management. And we want to transfer ownership. We don't have to necessarily transfer and lose control. We can transfer the ownership. So all the future appreciation and the income flows to that next generation.
Yeah, and I think that is really important. People miss that because that is a perfect way for you allow that CEO to kind of have a trial run, or even emotionally, your son or daughter, or whatever, can have that trial run. You don't have to manage day to day, but you're still in control so that business does not go sideways quick.
That's right. I think that sometimes, it's great that the next generation wants to grow and do all sorts of new things. But at the same time, the senior generation oftentimes looks to that business as a form of income and they don't want to put it at risk. And so if something crazy, like, I love my kids, they're in their 20s and 30s, but sometimes they come up with some pretty dumb ideas.
Mhm.
And, they're not my business, but if they were, I'd say, hey, I love you. You're good at lots of things, but we're calling a timeout on this one, right? And that's what that one, that voting control does for you.
Mhm. I present to my seller sometimes this: if a buyer offered you 10 times EBITDA tomorrow, are you ready to sell? Is your business ready to sell? And I have answers all over the place, from very good answers to I have no idea. Any experience with that? And any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think most business owners run their business very, very well, but having been involved in the sale process, the overwhelming majority don't realize what's involved and don't realize how unprepared they actually are. And that going through kind of a trial run with someone like you, your CPA, your lawyer, it's not that difficult, pays dividends. It pays dividends because when you go out to the market, now you're ready. For instance, here's this one small thing. I got a couple key salespeople, right? Do I have non-competes or non-solicitations with them? Right. Well, I don't believe in them. Oh, okay, that's fine, right? As far as I've got more than one shareholder, right? Do I have a shareholders agreement? If you and I are shareholders, right, and I want to sell the company, you don't, even if you've got a minority interest, you can muck up a deal, right? It's those types of things that you want to make sure, or, there are personal assets in the company. For instance, life insurance policy that you might want to get at. There's all sorts of things that you kind of go through and do an inventory and an audit of, hey, is this part of the sale? Do I want this? exposed, or do I want to get rid of it now? Those types of things.
So let me ask you this, Brad. Kind of like in summary, right? We have a guy, listen to this podcast, driving down the road, and he's kind of now you kind of put some things about succession planning. So you're driving back in his office. What are some of the key things? Like, kind of summarize this up for me. Succession planning. What are some of the key things why they should maybe call somebody who deals with succession planning?
Yeah, I think that a couple of the key things is that any business owner looks at his business and thinks about, I think, critical risk factors. What can go wrong? And they're trying to avoid that, right? Whether it's I'm going to lose a customer, whether a banking relationship. And I believe succession is a critical risk factor. So going back to the office, I'd say, think about, okay, tomorrow I get some bad news that I'm out for 6, 9, 12 months. What am I going to do? Who's going to take over, right? But that's really the minority of the situation. The key is, the question I often ask is I started this conversation by saying, whether it's 5 years or 10 years from today, what has to happen with respect to this business for me to feel good about the succession of the business? Because most business owners care about their employees, right? They want them to be successful. They want the business to continue. So I would suggest that when they go back, they think about, where they want this business 5 years from today. And if it's no different, then, it's no different. But I at least they asked the question.
I think you gave a lot of great knowledge on succession planning. So let me kind of transfer a little bit to this.
Okay.
What is one challenge our listener community could help you solve? Is there something you're looking for? Some kind of help you're looking for?
Well, that's a terrific question. I'm always looking for the obstacles that business owners face, just because I want to learn more about the challenge that they have. Because the more I learn about challenges and obstacles, the better I become. When I wrote my book a number of years ago, Bill, that was one of the things that I did. I solicited an international business organization. I said, if succession planning is so important, why don't other business owners do it? What's preventing them? And it's remarkable, from all over the world, every continent, maybe except for Antarctica, I got comments, and they were so consistent. It was really kind of cool.
Yeah, it is definitely. That's actually really interesting. So Brad, the first half we learned from you. The second half, let's learn a little more about you. So here's my opening question here. Take me back in time when little Brad, did you know you'd be running and growing a company?
Bill, it's funny. I think I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit. I grew up in an entrepreneurial home. So I didn't know what it would look like, but I wanted to be my own boss.
Nice. Now, I know from our chats, you became a lawyer and a CPA. So why? I mean, that's intriguing. You went to school, had great grades, and have 2 great degrees.
Yeah, thanks. Well, and as I said before, I've had multiple entrepreneurial activities during that process. So accounting is the language of business. I believe it's a really, really valuable skill set. I went to school, started as a marketing major, and then I transitioned to accounting, and I did very well. Worked for, at that point in time, a big 8 accounting firm, and I really, really learned how to read financial statements and help business owners. But what I realized when I was in the tax department, all the cool projects and neat projects were given to the lawyers in the tax department. And I oftentimes like to argue with people as well. So I went to law school, and it was the best investment I made. I learned so much there. And I practiced law for a law firm for 37 years, representing closely held business owners. I didn't go to court. All I did was represent closely held business owners, whether they're hiring, firing, buying, selling businesses. And so I tell people, Bill, I'm no smarter than anybody else. I just have seen this movie 100 times, and I can tell you where that scary monster is. It's about to, grab your head around the corner. And that's sort of the value that I have. And then again, as I mentioned before, I was fortunate that I started a few companies, and I'm proud to say we made the Inc. fastest growing kind of companies 9 different times with 3 different companies. So
Wow.
that's my story.
Yeah, that's actually remarkable. Remarkable.
Thank you.
What are you doing now? I mean, what are you doing, and what's the next couple of years look like?
Yeah, and so for about 10 years, separate from my law firm, and they were fully aware of this, I started a consulting firm on succession planning because I really realized it wasn't just about taxes, it wasn't just about um, legal issues. There were many other issues, business issues as well, strategic business issues that I developed my own process. And so I started that, and then I'm happy to say on January 1, I'm doing this full time, and the practice is nationwide. We've got a project out in California. I'm being interviewed for a project in Minneapolis. So that's what I'm doing right now. I'm helping closely held business owners with their succession plan.
Very impressive. So, what makes your company different in succession planning? What's special about you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'd like to tell you that I'm special, but I'm not that special. I think that if there's a few things that people say about me that maybe make me different as opposed to special, is we get stuff done, right? Um, I don't, when I meet with somebody, Bill, I don't give them a 20 page report on this is your succession plan. I actually have a 1 page roadmap where we work through it, which I'll explain in a second. And I say, hey, if you're going to hire me with the expectation we're going to meet 4 times throughout the year, every 90 days. And then, so when we meet and we develop this plan, we're going to meet in 90 days and I'll talk to you in between, but we'll knock off things, one thing at a time. And my experience has been after about a year, we've accomplished a really, really effective succession plan. You had mentioned, I have this roadmap where I take it slightly different again is I take a strategic planning approach to succession planning. When I started my first business, I'd mentioned earlier, we were abject failures. We were losing money. We didn't know what we were doing. And then I started learning about strategic planning. And then I did it every quarter for 25 years with all the various businesses I had. During that process, I said, hey, why can't this apply to succession planning? So I developed my own strategic planning process for succession planning. So I guess that's how I'm different if you want to say special.
Yeah, but I would also say, how about this roadmap? Because you mentioned a couple of times, but I also know a little bit about it. So tell me a little about this roadmap.
Yeah, and so the roadmap is 6 logical steps, and I'll try to go through it quickly because I think it would be helpful. So the first category, the first thing we work with is I call it the purpose stage, right? I mentioned about vision. So I say, okay, what are our core values? What do we believe in? Because I believe we all act by our own values, good, bad, or different. And then what's our vision? What's our ultimate vision? Whether it's to sell or not sell, whether it's to keep it within the family. It's again, this is your vision, not my vision. Then I say, why? Simon Sinek wrote, first begin with why, right? So if we know what our values are and we know what our vision, I say, well, why do you have that vision? Why do you want to sell it? Or why do you want to transfer to the family? Well, because it's a legacy, or I feel I'm a steward. And that gives you, the why gives you the jet fuel to overcome those issues, right? So that's, first stage is where we're going. The next stage is the discovery stage, right? And I explain in my book, I hate to go to the mall, but when I go to the mall, what do? I look for the big block at the entrance and for the red dot, and this is where I am. And you mentioned it earlier, business owners don't realize sometimes where they are, whether they're C corporation, whether they're an S corporation, whether they own all the shares, they don't own the. And so we do a deep dive as to where they are, make sure they know where they are, because if I'm going to the Apple store, I need to know if I'm on the second floor or the first floor, right? The next stage, I believe, could be one of the most valuable stages, and I call it the challenge stage. We mentioned this earlier. So now I know where I want to go. Now I know where I am. What's in my way, right? And so we list the obstacles. What are the threats? What's preventing us from getting there? Again, I would argue, if there were no obstacles, you'd be there and you don't need me. Once we list the obstacles, we say, okay, what are the strengths? For instance, we don't have to do this today. We don't have to do it tomorrow. We got strong financials. We got, a good next generation of leaders, whatever that may be. And then lastly in this category, if we get this right, what good things will come from it? For instance, I'll be able to retain employees. I'll be able to recruit employees. I'll be able to retire, whatever those things are, right? So that's kind of the foundation. So we know where we want to go. We know where we are. We know what's in our way. Okay. The next stage, I call a mission stage. And it's a question, Bill Gates once said, most people overestimate what they can do in a year, but underestimate what they can do in 10. So I say to the business owner, okay, if we're sitting here 3 years from today or 5 years from today, what has to happen for you to feel good about your progress? Well, I'd like to have a board of directors. I'd like to have my son in leadership development. I'd like to have 2 classes of stock because I want to transfer voting, whatever they may be. What's in your way? And then we start to get a little granular. Okay, what are the strategies that we can deploy? Well, I'm going to hire an attorney to create 2 classes of stock. I'm going to find a leadership development program to put my son in. I'm going to start figuring out how to form a board of directors. Whatever they may be, those are the strategies. Okay, if that's what we're going to do in 3 years, then I say, okay, what can we do in the next 12 months? I call it the annual stage. What can we do in the next 12 months to get us closer to the 3-year, to get us closer to the vision, keeping in mind the obstacles that are on the way? Well, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this, right? And then we start to develop the tactics. And then lastly, where I think I differ from other people is a terrific book called The 12-Week Year. And the authors talk about we should all plan our lives around 12 weeks. It's long enough to get stuff done, but short enough to keep our eye on the ball. So we say, okay, these are the things we're going to do in the next 90 days. We do specific things, and we're going to show up in 90 days, right? There's an old saying, if you want to improve something, measure it. But if you want to improve something exponentially, measure it and have to report out on it. So I say, Bill, you're going to do this in 90 days. Yes, I'll do it in 90 days. Remarkably, Bill, when I call him up around 60 days, hey, Bill, how are we doing? I'm running around. I got to get this done. I got to get it done. And, 9 times out of 10, we get it done. And so that's my process. And what I have found is after the 3rd or 4th meeting, we've really developed and executed upon a really effective succession plan.
I will tell you my lowly opinion, what makes you different also. All that's all true. I agree.
Thank you.
But what I'm always impressed with when we meet about a client, we meet about a problem, you always do ask the appropriate questions. You get stuff done based on those questions. And the other thing is you make it very simple. So I understand as a business broker, I'm sure you talk to lawyers, financial planners, business owners, and you make it very, very simple. And that's very impressive because it is complex. Some of this stuff is complex.
Thank you for saying it. And you said something that's really important. And I tell this to business owners. My process is simple, but it's not easy, right? It's a defined strategic approach. And if you follow it, it's simple. However, overcoming those obstacles is hard. So I believe that, that you need to have a simple process, although it may be hard to accomplish. But you're right. I really appreciate you saying that. And it's only taken me, about 25 years to develop this process.
Still, you're very good at it.
Thanks.
So the other reason why simple came in my mind is, as you know, I'm going through your certification program.
Right.
So one, tell me a little bit about it, but the reason what kind of popped in my head was you do make that simple. You're teaching something that you said, like you said, spent 25, 30 years of your life in. You explain it in a very simple way. So please tell me about that.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. During COVID, because we were stuck in our house, we didn't know what to do. Let me take a step back. So I developed a succession planning process, and I tested it. And I said, you know what? Someone once told me writing is the highest form of thinking. So I said, I'm going to write a book, right? And so I wrote the book to not only prove the process, but to help other business owners. And so, we have the book out there that you can get on Amazon, right? Then I said to myself, okay, that helps business owners. What about other advisors? How can I help other advisors, such as yourself, financial advisors, attorneys, CPAs, coaches? How can I help them? And so during COVID, I developed a succession certification process, and it was 9 modules. Each module was about 45 minutes long, and there was a workbook. It wasn't bad. And I sent it out to a number of people, and it was very well received. But But I wanted to take it to another level. I wanted to do certification 2.0. So for about 2 years recently, I've improved the process. I improved the workbook. And then I flew down to Atlanta and had it professionally filmed and videoed. And I'm really proud of it. And so now I have it out. That's available to anybody that wants to take the program that has a minimum of 5 years of business experience. It's going to be really hard for a guy or a gal right out of undergrad to get it. You have to have some business acumen. And so, as I said, the folks that have gone through it, it's been very well received, and I'm really proud of it. So
You should be.
thank you.
Which leads me to that question. What isn't, I mean, you said 5 years business, but like what type of people, so, business brokers, et cetera, what type of people would make good candidates to go through your program?
I think any advisor who deals with business owners is a good candidate. One, they understand succession planning much deeper, know the questions to ask and how to implement. Even if they don't implement it, they become much better advisors, in my opinion, because now they have another skill set as opposed to what they've had before. But again, just like me, I charge for a fee, and so those advisors, separate from their business, whether they're a CPA or a financial advisor or a business, I just charge a flat fee, and they can charge a flat fee. And again, I will tell you that in my experience, you develop a much deeper and richer relationship with your client. So, I practice law as well as had this consulting practice. When I took people through a succession planning process, there was nobody they wanted to use other than me because I knew their business so well.
How, so use a business broker, CPA, whatever, but they're like, Brian, I really don't have any experience in succession planning. How do you help them get that certification and really start to learn it and understand it to be able to help their clients?
I think the program is a good start. And what I offer, Bill, separate from the program, is to work one-on-one with those other advisors. I want this to be successful. I really want to take this to the next level because it's going to take people like you and other business advisors to do this. I can only do so many of these. So I want to invest in people like you and others to make them successful.
Excellent. So let's go to one of our last questions here. I just appreciate the conversation. I can go on and on with you. I'll be honest with you. I always learn so much from you.
Thank you.
If you can go back in time and meet yourself the day before you founded one of your companies, what advice would you give yourself?
Don't be afraid to fail because it's going to happen. And it's just part of the growth factor. Yeah. I was so afraid when I was young to fail that it prevented me from probably doing things. You have to have courage.
Yeah. I think a lot of business owners get paralyzed and then that really by fear. And that really.
Yeah. I heard this described the other day and I thought it was really an excellent insight. What's the difference between confidence and courage? Right? So confidence, you feel good, right? I have confidence that I can run a 10K. I have confidence that I can, review a contract, right? But courage, you don't feel so good with courage, right? And you're like, well, I'm not sure I want to do this. And it's an uneasy feeling, but you've got to overcome it because when you do, you gain confidence and you grow.
Yeah, they're excellent points. So I know you're very busy. You have all this stuff going on, but what do you do outside of work? What makes Brad happy on his free time?
Well, I'm a terrible golfer, but I love the game.
Yeah.
And my wife's trying to get me into pickleball. I'm trying to avoid it like the plague. And I do have a little granddaughter in New Jersey that I just adore. And so I try to get out there as much as possible. So those are my granddaughter, golf, and the avoidance of pickleball.
Nice. Well, all three of them made you smile. I mean, it's one of the biggest smiles I've seen, especially the granddaughter, for sure. So, Brad, if people need your help or whatever, just want to connect with you, what's the easiest way to connect with you, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest place is just to go into my website, thesuccessionsolution.com. And they can ping me through there. or they can send me an email at brad@thesuccessionsolution.com. So, but thanks for asking.
No problem. So, Brett, thank you so much for being on the show. I definitely enjoyed our chat. You've shared some information that I think every business owner should listen to, no matter what stage they are in business. So thank you very much, sir.
Oh, you're welcome. And by the way, I think this Still City Growth podcast is great. I've been listening to it. Keep up the good work. I think you're providing a real value to business owners.
I appreciate that. Thank you, audience. If you learned something today, laughed, tell someone about this podcast. Again, Brett, thank you. And this has been another exciting episode of Still City Growth. See you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Still City Growth. Thanks for joining us. For show notes and more, visit stillcitygrowth.live. Still City Growth is proudly sponsored by Murphy Business of Pittsburgh, offering expert guidance in buying, selling, and valuing businesses to help you achieve your goals. Until next time.